was an early reader, and it's a little hard for me to separate them all out. And I went through uh, all the poetry. My mother liked poetry a lot, and the A. A. Milne's When We Were Young, and Now We Are Six, and Robert Louis Stevenson's Garden of Verses. But I think the one that sticks in my mind the most was first I read Alice in Wonderland. That was one of the first books after I really learned how to read. The one that I came back to most was the very short sequel to Alice in Wonderland called Through the Looking Glass. And I was thinking about why I liked that so much. And I think it was a book that got me to write poetry, because in that book, it had some of my favorite poems. It had the Jabberwocky poems in it. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves that gyre and gimble in the wave. And it had the Walrus and the Carpenter, and it had all kinds of wonderful, wonderful, strange stories. And there was something about Through the Looking Glass that spoke to something that has stayed with me. I felt even as a boy that reading that story and those poems is that it carried a message that was below it. The message was sort of sad, and the rhythms and often the actual tales in the Looking Glass were much darker than the surface of them. And this stayed with me, and I found it intriguing, and I find it sort of true with the poetry that I learned to love as I grew older. But for instance, the Walrus and the Carpenter, they were about, they're talking very sweetly, but they're eating up all the walrus, eating up all the oysters. And I can remember that when I was a young boy, saying, this is really terrible, you know. And of course, he's having fun with it. And Jabberwocky is a poem, of course, about a frightening creature. And all of the characters in Through the Looking Glass have something, you know, really wrong with them. And I like that idea of things being deeper and darker than they seemed on the surface. And so that's the one that I've come back to more than any other, I'd say. One of the things that early reading had done for us is that we were interested with our children of reading to them. And Jeanne particularly would read to the kids at night. And as I said, my mother read to me. And we moved down from the north, from Minnesota, and to exotic Florida. And our son Pete began collecting lizards, and he had lizards with names. And I sat down one night and I just made up a limerick form, which is one of the forms I like from the children. And basically, this is the way it started. I probably just popped out of my head, more or less. And I said, the legend of Larry the Lizard is champion, super, and wizard. It will cause you to sigh, to laugh, and to cry, and give you a pain in the gizzard. And when I read that to him, I gave him a little poke. Of course, he shrieked. And then, of course, the next night, he wanted another one. And so I made up another lizard poem, and then it became something that we did every night. And we, all of a sudden, wasn't quite of a sudden, after a month or so, we had 40 little lizard poems, which turns out to be, it's the longest story told in limerick form, at least that I know of. And it was about a lizard band, and what we did was to pair different lizards with different instruments, so it was very educational. So Jeanne did research on saxophones and how harps and grand pianos, and I wrote a little story about a musical lizard who eventually formed his own band. And they wanted a singer, yeah, so we got Amanda, who was a salamander. We crooed out a tune, the frogs would all swoon, and the goose began chasing the gander. So then we have a little band with a little moral, because they get very, very proud of themselves and they play louder and louder. And they have a drummer, a chameleon, toting a drum. You sounded real cool from over the pool, across which I've recently swum, he says. And they start banging out music, and they're playing it along the room. There's a bassoon comes in, and Larry starts to get a swelled head because he thinks he's going to make a lot of money being in this band. And they've got a flying lizard come in, and at any rate, what happens at the end is they have a cat. They have a group. They call themselves the Musical Scales, and they're playing "I Dream of Jeannie," which is my wife's name. And of course that rhymes with Sweeney. Our band is quite teeny, but if each of our boys keeps increasing his noise, we'll be heard by the cat they call Sweeney. And that turns out to be true. And the music attracts the cat. And that was the end of our band, the best and the best lizard band in the land. The cat gave a slurp and a musical burp, purring. My, that piano was grand. And it ends that the children, if they listen to it on the ground, they can hear the strains of the Viennese waltz. It's the ghost of Larry the lizard returning to earth for a visit, and the ants and the bugs and the worms and the slugs try. Champion, super, and wizard. And I think it's because of the darkness that I mentioned that I was attracted to with the stories of Lewis Carroll through the Looking Glass. At the end of the book, the cat eats the lizard band, and then as it goes on to them playing in heaven and all that. But I had friends, say, "How could you have that cat eat that sweet little lizards?" But it was great fun to do, and occasionally this book surfaces in some school, and I go and have to read them. It takes us back to a very nice time in our lives.